Welcome to Youthology Live and Youthology Resources. You are joining us on all kinds of formats. Thank you for doing that. If you're wondering where to find us, here's a quick promo. Just go to our social media, hit the link tree, and at that link tree address, you will find all of our platforms. You can go to our website at youthology.com and see the blog to this manuscript. You can go to YouTube and watch all of our leadership videos there at YouTube. On that link tree, it'll take you to our iTunes page, and you can listen no matter where you are, right? So, hey, find us in one of those formats, and thank you for joining us this week. This week is part 2 of our topic on responding to teenagers in crisis. You know, all of us are going to go through something at some time in our life, a difficulty, suffering, some kind of a hardship. And so as leaders, how do we help our teens in that setting when they go through something like that? So I want to give you 7 coping methods, okay? 7 coping methods when it comes to things like accidents that cause, a scar or a loss of a limb, or put a teenager in a wheelchair, or something that's a long-term effect of an accident. Or maybe it's a sickness, it's a long-term sickness, something that is going to last for a while, and a student's going to have to process that, and a family has to deal with that. And then ultimately also death, and maybe the ultimate loss in someone's life, right? So I want to deal with all of those. I'm going to put them all together, and I think you'll see where we're going with this in these coping methods. 7 coping methods. Hey, number 1, understand sometimes we really don't know what to do. And that's okay. All this other stuff that I'm going to talk about, sometimes one thing will work with one person, and maybe points 4 and 5 will work with another person. But I've learned this, that sometimes in all of our efforts, it may not work. We may not help somebody other than just being there, right? How important that is. I've learned that sometimes suffering and hardship and crisis is personal, and it's just not math, it's art. Isn't that interesting? That when we go through difficulty, oftentimes it's not math where I can figure this out. It's art. It's in the eye of the beholder and the person going through it. So understand, number 1, that sometimes you just don't know what to do, and that's okay. Number 2, allow the person who is being affected by this difficulty, this hardship, this suffering, this loss, this accident, allow them to go through this process and to begin the steps of grieving. I'll cover those in just a minute. But oftentimes, we say things like, listen, it's okay, just move on. Or we can think we're trying to solve the problem by suppressing their feelings, when really we should not be suppressing feelings. No, often I think we can stop the healing process if we do that. So I've learned to not filter the feelings that people have. Allow them to go through those feelings and to understand that you want honesty out of them. You want genuineness out of them. You want them to be real, okay, not fake, okay? So that's number 2. Number 3 is encourage people to talk. Talking is a process. Talking is a healer. It helps us understand maybe what is going on inside when we put our words together, and then somebody can help us process those words, maybe what we really mean by that. So the more someone talks, the easier it is for them to heal, because really talking becomes part of the process of sharing feelings that we're not even sure what they mean. I can explain it best this way. Often when I'm going through a difficulty, and many of you know my story and the loss of my wife a few years ago, it's easy to just stop, especially when I'm alone and no one's around, to not even speak, and to sit in silence, and to let my mind begin to say things to itself or to feel things. But what I've learned is if I talk talk that out, then I put some intelligence and I put some meaning and some phrases to it. And when somebody else hears that, it can help me process my thoughts maybe a little better than just letting them echo in my mind. I hope that makes sense to you. It sure did to me. Let me lead you to number 4, and that is the stages of grief, set right in the middle here. The stages of grief, the processes that people will go through. It may look like denial initially. When somebody is going through suffering, it may look like denial. It may look like sadness. It may look like depression, right? Where sadness gets beyond, in that second part of the grieving process, gets beyond a normal sadness of loss or sadness because of the situation, and it gets into depression, and they're not able to talk, and they isolate themselves, right? And then these stages can move to anger or rage, right? And these are not all in the same order, depending on the sociological model or the psychological model. There'll be different, orders for these, but the anger will set in, and then it will move to number 4, and that is guilt. Guilt, and sometimes with guilt comes like this regret, like, man, I could have done more. Or as you're healing, you feel the guilt that it's behind you, right? Or maybe regret that you could have done more, and so now you feel guilty that you didn't do enough. And so all of these problem solving starts to come, and boy, I wish if I would have just, the second guessing, the hindsight, that in the process. And then we get into blame, don't we? We get into blame. We'll blame others. We'll blame God. We'll blame ourselves. We'll blame the person, or we'll blame an accident, and somebody caused that. That's natural, and that's okay to walk through that. And then finally, we'll move into acceptance. I want to say something about acceptance, because I'm going to move to number 5 is going to be acceptance. But just in these grief stages, when you get to the stage of acceptance, okay, that's not a negative thing. So understand that's just part of the process. So let me move to number 5. And that whole idea of acceptance and change. Because you know what I found when I was going through the loss of my wife? I began to heal and feel like God was doing things in my life, and others were helping me, and the things they were saying really helped me to go to sleep and not to be in despair, those kind of things, or angry or whatever, all those processes I was going through. When I began to accept this, I started feeling like, I shouldn't be over Jane. I shouldn't be over her loss. Or maybe you feel like when you start to accept something that it means that you are disrespecting or that you have failed. Maybe you're dealing with a young person who has a sickness or maybe this accident, and they feel like when they start to accept it that they're a failure and they didn't fight long enough. Man, don't let that happen, because to be honest, I really believe that acceptance is faithfulness, not failure. Did you hear that? Acceptance of this situation can ultimately be faithfulness, not failure. Okay? So see that in number 5. Number 6. This is one of the most freeing coping methods is to involve others in the process. We just finished some mental health teachings and blogs the last few weeks, and we went there and talked about referral not being failure. Listen, at some point when you're helping someone, maybe you feel like you're not helping, and you don't know what else to say. I've learned bringing another counselor into the setting is really a new set of fresh eyes and fresh language to help this person. And, aside from just another counselor, what about involving others in their circle, peers? I love to pull other students and get them around a student who's suffering or going through a difficulty, because students know how to talk to students better than adults know how to talk to students sometimes. Have you found that to be true? Man, I have. And so I love to watch other students get involved with me and bring them into the session, or even just take them over and let the person that's struggling meet somebody else who's gone through a suffering and a difficulty also. Then they realize, man, I'm not the only one, right? Let me take you to the last coping method. And this is probably the most difficult to talk about. I mean this because this is maybe a weakness of mine. This is something that maybe I don't see from someone else's perspective. You know, empathy is really important, but I'm weak in that at times. And it relates to this last area. And that last area is our death attitude. Our death attitude, or our sickness attitude, or our accident, or our suffering, or our hardship attitude. You know, it can be easy for us to think, I don't deserve this. I'm elite. I'm American. See, in the West, we don't deal with death very well. Because death is a hard thing for us. Death is like, I'm going to deny it. I'm going to delay it. I'm going to fight it. But I don't believe that that's true. I don't believe that death is always a negative thing. Really, let that sink in. Because in the East, there's a little more of a mystical feel about it. That death is just a part of life. It's just a part of the process. So depending on how your death attitude, it can be really difficult to deal with disappointments and hardship. Your hardship attitude, it can be really difficult if you've got an attitude toward hardship that is a negative thing, right? I want to give you a resource. It's probably self-serving, but for those of you that have not read my book, it's called #IfJob-Had-Twitter. What would Job say if he had social media? What would he say to millennials about suffering and hardship, right? That's so important. And if you'll read that, I've got a chapter in there that is really practical. And I'm going to blog some of those principles from that chapter so you can follow along. Thank you for joining us on these coping methods and helping teenagers deal with crisis. Okay? Again, all you got to do is go to our social media, hit the link tree, and that will take you to all the platforms where you can watch this, where you can read this, where you can listen to this, okay? At our YouTube, at youthology.com, and at our iTunes pages. So once again, thank you for joining us. This has been Youthology Resources, and join us again on episode 54, which will be in 1 week from today. I'm going to tackle another topic, and I'll bring that to you, and you'll be able to follow along with us and increase your youth leadership, okay? Hey, thank you for joining us. Have a great week.